A few nights ago, I had one of those experiences that almost everybody can relate to. It was around 2 in the morning. I was sleeping peacefully when suddenly I felt that familiar itch on my arm. A mosquito. I slapped the spot instinctively, turned over, and tried to go back to sleep. A few minutes later, another bite. Then another. At that point, I was annoyed. You know that feeling. You're tired, half asleep, and all you want is a good night's rest. But somewhere in the darkness, there's a tiny flying criminal making sure that's not going to happen. Then came the sound, that high-pitched buzzing near my ear. Not loud, not dangerous, but somehow one of the most irritating sounds on earth. I jumped out of bed, turned on the light, and started looking around. Nothing. The mosquito had completely disappeared. I checked the wall. Nothing. I checked the ceiling. Nothing. I checked behind the curtains. Still nothing. It was like the mosquito had vanished into another dimension. So I turned the light off and went back to bed. About 30 seconds later, bzzz, right next to my ear again. At that moment, I was ready for war. I jumped up, turned on the light, started swinging a towel around like I was fighting for my life. Still couldn't find it. Now I was fully awake, frustrated, and losing patience. And that's when something interesting happened. I stopped. Instead of chasing it around the room, I sat down and thought about what was actually happening. The mosquito wasn't beating me because it was stronger. It wasn't smarter. It wasn't faster. The room belonged to me. The light switch belonged to me. The bed belonged to me. Yet somehow this tiny insect was winning. Why? Because I was reacting emotionally. The mosquito wasn't. I was acting out of frustration. The mosquito was simply following its nature. The more irritated I became, the more random my actions became. I wasn't solving the problem, I was just creating more movement. And honestly, when I thought about it, that's exactly how a lot of people deal with problems in life. The moment something goes wrong, they panic. Something doesn't work out. They panic. Someone rejects them. They panic. Business slows down. They panic. A customer says no. They panic. And when people panic, they start doing random things. Not smart things, not effective things, just things. Because action feels better than stillness, even if the action is completely useless. Think about it. When people are nervous, they often believe that doing something is always better than doing nothing. But that's not necessarily true. Sometimes random action is worse than no action. At least when you're doing nothing, you're not making the situation worse. I realized I was doing exactly that with the mosquito. Every time I jumped up and started swinging at the air, I was basically announcing my position. I was telling the mosquito, hey, danger is here, hide immediately. And that's exactly what it did. The funny thing is that the mosquito wasn't the real problem anymore. My reaction was. The bite lasted a few seconds. The frustration lasted an hour. And isn't that how life often works? The original problem is usually small. Our reaction turns it into something much bigger. A coworker makes a rude comment. Now we're angry for 3 days. A stranger says something online. Now we're arguing with people we've never met. A small setback happens in business. Now we're questioning our entire future. The event itself is often tiny. The emotional response becomes enormous. And that's where we get stuck. Sitting there in my room at 2 in the morning, staring at the walls, I started noticing something. Every time I reacted aggressively, the mosquito disappeared. Every time I calmed down, I started seeing things more clearly. It's amazing how much better your eyes work when your emotions stop taking over. I slowed down. I stopped chasing. I stopped swinging. I stopped acting like the room was on fire. Instead, I just observed. I looked around carefully, not desperately, just patiently.
And that's when I started noticing details I had missed before. A shadow near the wall, a tiny dark spot near a shelf, a small movement in the corner of the room. Things that were invisible when I was rushing suddenly became obvious when I slowed down. That made me think about something. Maybe most people don't fail because they're lazy. Maybe they fail because they're constantly reacting. They're always in response mode, always chasing, always rushing, always forcing, never observing, never studying, never understanding what's actually happening. A lot of people think success comes from moving faster, but sometimes success comes from slowing down enough to see what everyone else misses. A hunter doesn't run blindly through the forest. A hunter watches. A chess player doesn't move pieces randomly. A chess player studies the board. A good investor doesn't throw money at every opportunity. A good investor waits. Observation is underrated. Patience is underrated. Calmness is underrated. Everybody talks about hard work. Very few people talk about clear thinking. But clear thinking is often what makes hard work effective. Without it, effort gets wasted. That night, I learned something from a creature smaller than a fingernail. The harder I chased, the harder it became to catch. The more emotional I became, the less effective I became. And maybe that's true for more than just mosquitoes. Maybe it's true for money. Maybe it's true for relationships. Maybe it's true for business. Maybe it's true for life itself. Sometimes the answer isn't to move faster. Sometimes the answer is to stop. Look around. Pay attention. Understand the pattern. Because when you're desperate, you see problems everywhere. When you're calm, you start seeing opportunities. And as I sat quietly in that room, watching and waiting, instead of chasing and swinging, I began to realize that the mosquito had accidentally taught me a lesson that many people spend years learning. Not every problem is solved with more force. Some problems are solved with more awareness. And that realization changed the entire game.
After sitting there quietly for a few minutes, I started noticing something interesting. The mosquito wasn't actually that difficult to deal with. The real challenge was controlling my own reaction. Every time I got frustrated, I jumped up, waved my arms around, and started attacking the air like a crazy person. And every single time, the result was the same. The mosquito disappeared. It was almost funny when I thought about it. This tiny insect wasn't stronger than me. It wasn't smarter than me. It certainly wasn't paying rent in that room. Yet somehow, it kept escaping. Why? Because every time I reacted emotionally, I gave away my advantage. The moment I started making noise and creating chaos, the mosquito knew danger was coming. It became alert, it became cautious, it became harder to catch. Then I realized something. This isn't just how mosquitoes behave. This is how life works. The more desperately you chase certain things, the further they seem to get away from you. We've all experienced this. Think about relationships. Have you ever noticed how some people become obsessed with getting someone's attention? The other person doesn't reply to a text message for a few hours. Suddenly, they send another message, then another, then another. Did you see my message? Are you busy? Everything okay? Now what started as a normal delay becomes pressure. The more attention they demand, the less attractive they become. The more they chase, the more the other person pulls away. Not because the other person is evil, not because they hate them, but because nobody likes feeling trapped. Desperation creates resistance. The same thing happens in business. Imagine a customer who is interested in your product but hasn't made a decision yet. A desperate salesperson starts calling constantly, sending messages every day, following up every few hours, trying to force the sale. What happens? The customer becomes uncomfortable. Instead of moving closer, they move away. Instead of saying yes, they disappear completely. Meanwhile, the best salespeople often do the opposite. They provide value, they answer questions, then they give the customer space to think. They're confident enough not to chase, and confidence attracts people in a way desperation never can. Money works the same way. This surprises a lot of people. Many people spend their entire lives chasing money. Every decision revolves around getting rich as fast as possible. They jump from opportunity to opportunity, from trend to trend, from business idea to business idea. One month it's cryptocurrency, the next month it's e-commerce, then it's AI, then it's real estate, then it's something else. They're constantly running, constantly searching, constantly chasing. But because they're chasing so hard, they never stay in one place long enough to develop real skills. Real wealth usually comes from creating value consistently over time. But consistency isn't exciting. Chasing is exciting. That's why so many people stay busy while making very little progress. They mistake movement for advancement. They think because they're running, they're getting somewhere. But running in circles is still running in circles. One of the biggest lessons I learned as I got older is that urgency and importance are not the same thing. Just because something feels urgent doesn't mean it deserves an immediate reaction. That mosquito buzzing near my ear felt urgent, but randomly swinging at the air wasn't important. A lot of people spend their lives reacting to urgency. Every notification, every opinion, every criticism, every trend, every distraction. They never stop long enough to ask a simple question. What's actually worth my attention? The people who seem calm under pressure aren't calm because they have fewer problems. They're calm because they don't react to every problem. They choose carefully. They understand that attention is limited, energy is limited, time is limited. If you waste those resources chasing everything, you'll eventually catch nothing. Look at professional athletes, look at successful entrepreneurs, look at great investors. One thing they all have in common is discipline. Not just the discipline to work hard, the discipline to ignore distractions, the discipline to wait, the discipline to remain patient when everyone else is panicking. That's much harder than it sounds. Human beings naturally want immediate results. We want answers today, we want success today, we want rewards today. Waiting feels uncomfortable, observation feels slow, patience feels passive, but often those are exactly the things that produce the best outcomes. Nature teaches this lesson everywhere. A lion doesn't sprint after every animal it sees. That would waste energy. It waits, it watches, it chooses the right moment. A fisherman doesn't jump into the water and chase fish by hand. He understands timing matters. He understands positioning matters. He understands patience matters. The same principle applies to almost every meaningful goal in life. The more emotional you become, the harder it is to see clearly. And when you can't see clearly, you make poor decisions. Poor decisions create more problems create more emotions, and before long you're trapped in a cycle of your own making. That's why some people spend years fighting the same battles, not because the problem is unbeatable, but because they keep approaching it the same way. They chase, the problem runs. They chase harder, the problem moves further away. The cycle repeats. Meanwhile, someone else takes a different approach. They step back, they observe, they study the situation, they identify patterns, and eventually they solve the problem with half the effort. That night, sitting quietly in my room, I began to understand something important. The goal was never to chase the mosquito. The goal was to understand the mosquito. Once I understood its behavior, catching it would become much easier. And that's true for almost everything. Want to improve your finances? Understand money. Want better relationships? Understand people. Want a better career? Understand value. Want better results? Understand reality. Because once you understand how something works, you no longer have to chase it blindly. You can position yourself intelligently, and that is where real progress begins. Most people think success belongs to the fastest person, but very often success belongs to the person who stays calm long enough to see what everyone else is missing. The mosquito was still somewhere in the room. I knew that, but now I wasn't hunting it with frustration. I was studying it with patience, and that small change in mindset was about to make all the difference.
As the room became quiet again, something changed. For the first time that night, I wasn't focused on catching the mosquito. I was focused on understanding it. That may sound like a small difference, but it completely changed my approach. Most people approach problems like hunters chasing prey. They see a problem, they attack immediately. They assume speed is the answer. They assume more effort is the answer. They assume if they just push harder, they'll eventually win. Sometimes that's true, but often it's not. Sometimes the fastest way to solve a problem is to stop moving for a moment and pay attention. That's exactly what I did. I sat on the edge of my bed and simply looked around the room. No panic, no frustration, no wild swinging, just observation. A few minutes passed. Then I noticed something. On a nearby wall, there was a tiny dark spot, barely noticeable. If I had been running around the room like before, I never would have seen it. But because I had slowed down, the details stood out. The mosquito had landed. After drinking blood, it wasn't flying around looking for trouble anymore. It was resting. And suddenly, everything made sense. The mosquito had a pattern. It wasn't acting randomly. It would come out, feed, find a safe place, stay still. The moment I understood the pattern, the situation stopped feeling chaotic. Now I had information, and information is power. The funny thing is that life becomes much easier when you stop seeing everything as random. Most things follow patterns. People follow patterns. Markets follow patterns. Organizations follow patterns. Even your own habits follow patterns. The problem is that most people are too busy reacting to notice them. Imagine someone who is constantly struggling financially. Every month feels like an emergency. Bills arrive, stress increases, money disappears. The cycle repeats. Many people respond by looking for quick solutions, a side hustle, a lucky investment, a shortcut, a miracle. But very few stop and ask, what pattern keeps creating the situation? Maybe they spend more than they earn. Maybe they avoid learning valuable skills. Maybe they make emotional purchases whenever they feel stressed. The symptoms look different every month, but the pattern stays the same. Until the pattern changes, the outcome rarely changes. The same thing happens in relationships. Some people keep ending up with the wrong partners, again and again. Each relationship looks different. Different names, different faces, different stories. Yet somehow the ending is always similar. After a while you have to ask, is the problem really bad luck? Or is there a pattern I'm refusing to see? Maybe they're attracted to the same personality type every time. Maybe they ignore the same warning signs every time. Maybe they keep making the same emotional decisions. Again, the details change. The pattern remains. And that's why observation is so powerful. Observation allows you to see beyond individual events. It helps you identify the system underneath. Most people focus on events. Successful people focus on patterns. An event is temporary. A pattern is repeatable. If you understand the pattern, you can often predict the event before it happens. Think about a skilled doctor. A patient walks in with symptoms. The doctor doesn't simply focus on the symptom. The doctor looks for the cause. The symptom is the surface. The pattern is underneath. The same principle applies everywhere. A good detective doesn't just look at evidence. A good detective looks for connections. A good investor doesn't just look at today's stock price. A good investor studies long-term trends. A good leader doesn't just react to problems. A good leader tries to understand why the problems keep appearing. Observation gives you an advantage because most people don't do it. Most people are too distracted. We're living in a world that rewards immediate reactions. Social media rewards immediate reactions. News rewards immediate reactions. Algorithms reward immediate reactions. Everything is designed to make you respond instantly. Very few things encourage you to stop and think. As a result, many people spend their entire lives reacting. Reacting to headlines. Reacting to opinions. Reacting to criticism. Reacting to fear. Reacting to uncertainty. They're constantly responding to what's happening around them, but they're rarely studying why it's happening. The people who achieve extraordinary results often develop a different habit. They observe before they act. When everyone else is emotional, they become curious. When everyone else is rushing, they slow down. When everyone else is making assumptions, they gather information. That doesn't mean they're passive. It doesn't mean they're lazy. It simply means they understand that good decisions come from good information. And good information usually comes from observation. The mosquito on the wall taught me that lesson better than any motivational quote ever could. When I was chasing it, I had energy but no direction. When I started observing it, I gained direction. Once you have direction, you don't need endless effort. You only need precise effort. There's a huge difference. Many people spend years working hard in the wrong direction. Then they wonder why they aren't getting results. It's like trying to catch a mosquito by attacking every corner of the room. You can burn a lot of energy doing that. But energy with accuracy is waste. Observation creates accuracy. Accuracy creates effectiveness. And effectiveness creates results. As I sat there looking at that tiny dark spot on the wall, I realized something. The mosquito hadn't suddenly become easier to catch. What had changed was me. I was no longer reacting emotionally. I was thinking strategically. I was no longer focused on movement. I was focused on understanding. And that shift, from reaction to observation,
is one of the most valuable skills a person can develop. Because in life, the people who see clearly usually don't have to fight as hard as everyone else. They see what others miss. They recognize patterns others ignore. And because they understand the game, they rarely waste energy playing it blindly. The mosquito was still sitting there, completely unaware that its hiding place had been discovered. It thought it was safe. It thought the danger had passed. But now the situation had changed. For the first time that night, I wasn't guessing. I wasn't hoping. I wasn't chasing. I knew exactly where the target was. And when you truly understand the situation, the solution often becomes surprisingly simple.
As I stared at the mosquito resting quietly on the wall, I couldn't help but laugh. For nearly an hour, this tiny insect had been controlling my night. Not because it was powerful, not because it was dangerous, but because it had successfully manipulated something far bigger than itself. My emotions. The mosquito didn't need to beat me physically. It only needed to make me frustrated. Once frustration took over, I started making mistakes on my own. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this happens everywhere in life. In fact, most people aren't defeated by problems. They're defeated by their emotional reaction to problems. That's an important distinction. The problem is often manageable. The emotional response is what makes it overwhelming. Think about how many bad decisions are made when people are angry. Someone insults them. Instead of thinking carefully, they react immediately. They send a message they later regret. They damage a friendship. They ruin a business relationship. They create a conflict that didn't need to exist. The original problem was small. The emotional reaction made it huge. Fear works the same way. Imagine an investor watching the market fall. The headlines are screaming. Everyone is panicking. Social media is full of predictions about economic collapse. Fear starts spreading like a virus. At that moment, many people stop thinking logically. They sell everything. They abandon their plan. They make decisions based on emotion rather than analysis. Then months later, when the market recovers, they realize their biggest loss wasn't caused by the market. It was caused by fear. The market simply triggered the emotion. Fear did the rest. The same thing happens in relationships. A person notices their partner acting differently. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe they're dealing with something personal. But instead of asking questions and gathering information, insecurity takes over. Suddenly, assumptions appear. Maybe they don't love me anymore. Maybe they're losing interest. Maybe something is wrong. Without evidence, the mind starts creating stories. And those stories often feel more real than reality itself. That's one of the biggest dangers of strong emotions. They distort perception. They convince you that imagination is fact. They make you believe you're seeing reality when you're actually seeing fear, anger, jealousy, or insecurity. The mosquito taught me that lesson in a surprisingly simple way. When I was frustrated, I couldn't think clearly. I couldn't observe properly. I couldn't notice obvious details. My emotions narrowed my vision. I became focused on immediate relief rather than effective action. That's exactly what emotions often do. They push us towards short-term comfort instead of long-term solutions. When you're angry, you want immediate revenge. When you're scared, you want immediate safety. When you're anxious, you want immediate certainty. But life doesn't always reward immediate reactions. In many cases, the best response is patience. And patience is difficult because emotions hate waiting. Emotions want action now. Reality often requires understanding first. This is one reason successful people appear calm under pressure. It's not because they don't feel emotions. They absolutely do. They're human. They feel fear. They feel frustration. They feel disappointment. The difference is that they don't allow those emotions to take control of the steering wheel. They acknowledge the feeling without surrendering to it. That's a skill, and like any skill, it takes practice. Consider a firefighter entering a burning building.
Panic would be natural. Fear would be natural. But panic doesn't help. The firefighter has been trained to stay focused despite the fear. The emotion exists. It just doesn't control the decision-making process. The same principle applies in everyday life. You don't need to eliminate emotions. That's impossible. You simply need to stop letting emotions make important decisions for you, because emotions are excellent messengers, but terrible leaders. They provide information. They tell you something matters, but they shouldn't determine your entire response. One of the most expensive mistakes people make is confusing feelings with facts. They feel rejected, so they assume they are rejected. They feel unsuccessful, so they assume they're failures. They feel uncertain, so they assume disaster is coming. But feelings aren't always accurate reflections of reality. Sometimes they're simply temporary states. Clouds passing through the sky. The problem comes when people build permanent decisions around temporary emotions. A bad day becomes a bad life. A setback becomes proof of failure. A criticism becomes proof of worthlessness. And suddenly they're fighting battles that only exist in their minds. Meanwhile, reality is often much less dramatic. The mosquito wasn't winning. It only seemed like it was winning because I was emotional. Once I calmed down, the situation became clear. The mosquito's strategy hadn't changed. Its behavior hadn't changed. The room hadn't changed. The only thing that changed was my state of mind. And that changed everything. That's a powerful lesson. Many times the fastest way to improve your situation isn't changing the situation itself. It's changing the way you respond to it. When you gain control over your emotions, you gain control over your decisions. When you gain control over your decisions, you gain control over your direction. And direction matters far more than intensity. A car moving at high speed in the wrong direction only gets lost faster. The same is true in life. Many people are working incredibly hard. They're putting in effort. They're taking action. They're staying busy. But their emotions are driving the vehicle. Fear is steering. Anger is steering. Ego is steering. Impatience is steering. And because of that, all their effort produces very little progress. That night, sitting quietly in my room, I realized that catching the mosquito was no longer the main lesson. The bigger lesson was understanding myself. The mosquito had exposed a weakness. Not a weakness in strength. A weakness in emotional control. And once I saw that, I began to understand why so many people struggle with problems that seem smaller than they are. The problem isn't always the obstacle. The problem is often the emotional storm the obstacle creates. Master the storm, and the obstacle usually becomes much easier to handle. The mosquito was still sitting there on the wall. Calm, still, completely unaware. And now, for the first time that night, I was calm too, which meant the advantage had finally shifted.
At this point, the mosquito was still sitting quietly on the wall. It had no idea I was watching it. No idea that I had figured out its pattern. No idea that the game had already changed. For most of the night, I had been reacting. Now I was waiting. And surprisingly, waiting felt much more powerful. Most people underestimate the power of timing. They think success comes from working harder than everyone else. They think the winner is always the person who moves first. Sometimes that's true, but very often the winner is the person who moves at the right time. There's a huge difference. Imagine a surfer standing on a beach. The surfer doesn't create the wave. The surfer doesn't control the ocean. The surfer can't force the wave to arrive earlier. All the surfer can do is prepare and wait. Then, when the right wave comes, they move. Too early, and they miss it. Too late, and they miss it. Timing matters. Life works the same way. Many people fail not because they're incapable, but because they're impatient. They want results immediately. They want success immediately. They want rewards immediately. And because they can't wait, they force situations that aren't ready yet. Think about business. A lot of entrepreneurs destroy good opportunities because they rush.
They launch products before they're ready. They hire people too quickly. They expand too fast. They borrow money before they have a stable foundation. From the outside, it looks like ambition, but often it's impatience disguised as ambition. The market doesn't care how badly you want something. Reality doesn't reward urgency. Reality rewards readiness. The same thing happens in careers. Many people are obsessed with promotions. They want a better title, a bigger office, more authority, and they want it now. But if the skills aren't there yet, the opportunity can actually become a burden. Have you ever seen someone get promoted before they were ready? At first they're excited. Then the pressure arrives. The responsibility arrives. The expectations arrive. And suddenly they're overwhelmed. They got what they wanted, but they weren't prepared to handle it. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't getting an opportunity. It's having enough time to become the person who can handle the opportunity. Nature teaches this lesson constantly. Look at how trees grow. A giant oak tree doesn't appear overnight. Its roots develop first. For years, much of the growth happens where nobody can see it. Underground, quietly, patiently. Then one day people notice the size of the tree, but what they're really seeing is the result of years of preparation. Most people want the visible success without the invisible preparation. They want the fruit without growing the roots, and that's why they struggle. They try to force outcomes that haven't earned the right to exist yet. One thing I've noticed about highly successful people is that they often look less busy than everyone else. That sounds strange, but it's true. The average person is constantly moving, constantly reacting, constantly chasing. The successful person often appears calmer, more selective, more deliberate. They understand that not every opportunity deserves attention. Not every battle deserves energy. Not every invitation deserves a yes. They know that focus isn't about doing more things. It's about doing fewer things better. The older I get, the more I realize that success is often subtraction rather than addition. It's removing distractions, removing unnecessary drama, removing emotional reactions, removing bad habits, removing noise. Most people keep adding things to their lives, hoping one of them will solve their problems. But clarity usually comes from eliminating what's unnecessary. That's exactly what happened with the mosquito. The moment I stopped running around the room, the situation became simpler. The moment I stopped chasing, I started seeing. The moment I stopped reacting, I started understanding. And understanding always creates leverage. A lot of life's biggest opportunities arrive quietly. They don't come with flashing lights. They don't come with dramatic announcements. If you're distracted, you'll miss them. If you're impatient, you'll overlook them. If you're constantly chasing the next thing, you'll never notice what's already in front of you. That's why patience isn't passive. Patience is active awareness. Patience is staying ready while everyone else becomes emotional. Patience is maintaining discipline while everyone else becomes desperate. Patience is trusting the process when results haven't appeared yet. People often confuse patience with weakness, but real patience requires tremendous strength. Anyone can react. Anyone can panic. Anyone can lose control. Remaining calm requires discipline. Remaining focused requires discipline. Waiting for the right moment requires discipline. And discipline is one of the rarest qualities in the modern world. We're surrounded by instant gratification. Food arrives in minutes. Entertainment arrives instantly. Information arrives instantly. Everything encourages speed. Very little encourages patience. Yet many of life's greatest rewards still operate on delayed timelines. Trust takes time. Mastery takes time. Reputation takes time. Wealth takes time. Strong relationships take time. There are no shortcuts around those realities. You can ignore them, you can fight them, you can complain about them, but you can't change them. Reality moves at its own pace. The people who understand that usually gain a huge advantage, because while everyone else is trying to force results, they're quietly preparing for them. As I sat there looking at the mosquito, I realized something funny. A few minutes earlier I had been losing, at least that's how it felt. Now nothing had changed physically. The room was the same. The mosquito was the same. The night was the same. Yet everything felt different. Why? Because I finally had patience, and patience had given me something that frustration never could, a clear opportunity. The mosquito had relaxed, its guard was down, it believed the danger was over. All I had to do was wait for the right moment. And that's true for many opportunities in life. The right move at the wrong time often fails. The right move at the right time can change everything.
Most people spend their lives searching for more force, more effort, more speed, more action. But often what they really need is better timing, because timing turns effort into results, and patience is what allows you to recognize when that moment finally arrives.
Finally, the moment came. The mosquito was still sitting on the wall, completely relaxed, completely unaware. I slowly stood up. No rushing, no panic, no wild swinging. I took a few careful steps forward, measured the distance, raised my hand, and with one clean motion, smack. Game over. The mosquito that had kept me awake for hours was gone in less than a second. And the funny thing was, the final action required almost no effort. The hard part wasn't killing the mosquito. The hard part was controlling myself long enough to do it properly. That realization stayed with me long after I went back to bed, because the mosquito was never really the lesson. The lesson was about how we deal with problems. Most people think success comes from working harder, and sometimes it does. But many problems aren't solved by more effort. They're solved by more clarity. Think about how often people make life harder than it needs to be. They get rejected and immediately assume they're not good enough. They experience one failure and assume they'll never succeed. They face one obstacle and start questioning everything. Then they spend months or even years fighting battles that exist mostly inside their own heads. The obstacle wasn't what defeated them. Their reaction did. The mosquito taught me something simple but powerful. The first problem is usually small. The second problem is our emotional response to the first problem. And the second problem is often much bigger. A bad comment online lasts 5 seconds. Thinking about it for a week is the real problem. A business setback lasts 1 month. Losing confidence for the next 3 years is the real problem. A relationship ends. The heartbreak is natural, but carrying bitterness for a decade becomes a self-inflicted wound. Life doesn't just test your abilities, it tests your emotional discipline. Anyone can stay calm when everything is going well. The real challenge is staying calm when things don't go according to plan. That's where most people lose their advantage. They stop observing. They stop thinking. They stop learning. And they start reacting. The world today encourages that behavior. Everything is designed to provoke immediate reactions. News headlines want your outrage. Social media wants your attention. Advertising wants your impulses. Everywhere you look, something is trying to trigger an emotional response. Because emotional people are predictable. Emotional people are easy to influence. Emotional people rarely stop long enough to think. But the people who consistently win in life often share one trait. They create space between the event and the reaction. Something happens. Then they pause. They observe. They gather information. They think. Only then do they act. That small pause changes everything. Because in that pause, emotion loses power and reason gains power. And reason is usually a much better guide. The older I get, the more I appreciate the value of seeing reality clearly. Not the reality I wish existed. Not the reality I fear. The reality that's actually there. Most mistakes happen when people confuse those things. They react to assumptions instead of facts. They react to fears instead of evidence. They react to stories instead of reality. Observation protects you from that. Observation forces you to look at what's actually happening. And reality is often much less dramatic than our imagination. When I first woke up that night, it felt like the mosquito was everywhere. It felt impossible to find, impossible to catch, impossible to stop. But none of that was true. The mosquito was following a predictable pattern the entire time. I simply couldn't see it because I was too busy reacting. How many problems in life are exactly the same? How many opportunities have people missed because they were too emotional to recognize them? How many mistakes have people made because they acted before they understood?
How many years have been wasted fighting symptoms instead of identifying causes? Probably more than we realize. One of the biggest advantages you can develop is the ability to remain calm when others are losing control. Not because you're smarter, not because you're lucky, but because calm people see things that emotional people miss. They notice patterns. They recognize opportunities. They identify risks earlier, and they make better decisions. Over time, those better decisions compound, just like small mistakes compound. A single good decision won't change your life overnight, but hundreds of good decisions made over years absolutely will. The same is true for bad decisions. That's why emotional discipline is so valuable. It's not about one moment, it's about the direction of your entire life. The mosquito eventually died because I stopped treating the situation like a crisis. I treated it like a puzzle. And puzzles are solved differently than emergencies. Emergencies require immediate action. Puzzles require understanding. Many people mistake one for the other. They treat every challenge like an emergency. Every delay, every setback, every disappointment, every criticism. Everything feels urgent. Everything feels personal. Everything feels like a crisis. But most of the time, life is simply presenting another puzzle. And puzzles reward observation. They reward patience. They reward clear thinking. That's the lesson I took from that late-night battle with a mosquito. Not every problem needs more force. Not every obstacle requires more effort. Sometimes what you need most is the ability to slow down, pay attention, and understand what's really happening. Because when you understand the pattern, the solution often becomes obvious. The mosquito eventually taught me something far bigger than how to get a good night's sleep. It taught me that in life, the person who stays calm usually sees what everyone else misses. And the person who sees clearly rarely has to fight as hard as everyone else. So the next time life starts buzzing around your head, trying to pull you into frustration, panic, or confusion, remember the mosquito. Don't rush. Don't chase blindly. Don't waste energy swinging at shadows. Turn on the light. Observe. Look for the pattern. Wait for the right moment. Then act with precision. Because sometimes the difference between failure and success is nothing more than the ability to stay calm long enough to see the truth.